and participants can hear me? This is a famous question if in the last 2 years, I suppose. Good evening once again, and a hearty welcome to the webinar series of CENTA. And today, apparently, I think it's a fourth week when CENTA is carrying out this particular webinar series. But before we commence, I think we will just think about the Almighty for a few seconds and then we'll go ahead. So, may I request all of you to join hands or eyes or probably think of anybody whom you feel you can attain that kind of solace. Deepam Jyoti Parabrahma, Deepam Jyoti Janardanaha, Deepo Harati Papani, Sandhya Deepam Namostute. Vande Gurum to all of you. And once again, a hearty welcome to CENTA Webinar Series in collaboration with Bangalore Sahodaya School Complexes Association. I'm sure you've been having a wonderful journey last 3 weeks and also trying to work out on all the learning materials that's been given to you and so that you can pass on the valuable feedback also to us. About CENTA, that is Center for Teacher Accreditation, it is a registered certification trademark in India, catering to the entire professional life of a teacher, certification, career growth, professional development, and helping organizations to recruit, support, and grow their teachers towards high quality education. CENTA currently serves over 6 lakh teachers and 12,000 institutional leaders, promoters from across 6,000 plus cities, towns, villages across India, and also 40,000 teachers from other countries such as UAE, Philippines, Nigeria, etc. We have our wonderful two resource people who've been relentlessly taking this kind of training to all the teachers who are ready to learn from last 3 weeks. Let me welcome on behalf of BSSCA Miss Upasna, who is lead for assessment and certification team at CENTA. She holds a bachelor's degree in biotechnology from Bangalore University. She has worked in an MNC for 8 years before transitioning to education, where she taught in various places like Bangalore, Pune, and New York. She has also done the Teach for India Fellowship and was working as a curriculum designer before joining CENTA. A hearty welcome to Miss Upasna from Bangalore Sahodaya team.
Thank you, ma'am.
So we have one more resource person, Ms. Shruti, who has also, I think, worked. They in coordination, both Upasna and Shruti have worked in coordination for the last 3 weeks, and this is the fourth week. Shruti is a lead for learning products team at CENTA. She holds a bachelor's degree in information science from Visvesvaraya University. She has worked as a software developer in an MNC for 2 years before transitioning to education, where she taught primary grades in a low income school as a part of a Teach for India fellowship. A hearty welcome to you, Ms. Shruti from BSSCA. I'm sure today's topic will certainly look forward. I mean, I'm sure teachers are waiting for today's topic because it's all about competencies and going by competency based education, which CBSE is promoting, NEP 2020 is promoting. I'm sure participants will get maximum benefit of today's session. So, not to forget, my dear participants, who, on behalf of whatever, all juggling things which is happening right now between the class exams, between the board practical exams, they still find time to join your sessions, and I'm sure they're benefiting a lot. A hearty welcome and good evening to all the participants. Looking forward for the session. Over to you, Ms. Shruti, as well as Upasna. Thank you so very much for being here to conduct the sessions for Bangalore Sahodaya School Complex Association. Over to you.
Thank you, ma'am. Good evening, everyone. Yeah, good evening, everyone. And we will shortly begin this session as soon as we share our screen for the presentation. Just want to take this moment to thank you, Vamshi Priya ma'am, for inviting us to be able to conduct these sessions and also help build this kind of a community where so many great ideas and thoughts are being shared, and it's not just a one way thing that we've been doing, but we have learned a lot ourselves through these webinars that we have conducted. It's been a good journey so far. Thank you, Shruti, for sharing your screen, and welcome to the fourth workshop, which is on teacher competencies and how they correlate to student competencies. And just to recap, if you haven't attended the previous sessions, we did one on multiple choice question, how to create good multiple choice questions. We saw how once you create those questions, how is it that you evaluate subjective questions using rubrics, so creating effective rubrics that are unbiased and as objective as possible. And then we also saw how reading comprehension skills are relevant not just to for English teachers and English students learning English, but also like the scope of it reaches across subject cuts across subjects, cuts across different skills, right? And today what we're trying to see is at a more broader level how are different teaching competencies, what are these and how do they correlate to student outcomes or student competencies. And as our norm, we talk about what CENTA does to support the teacher's entire career cycle. So what we have, our entire support is based on something called CENTA standards. These are set of competencies, and of course we'll go more into detail of these today. Um, uh, Using CENTA standards, we our methodology is to assess and certify teachers. We are a center for teacher accreditation. That's what the acronym stands for. Our support is through those standards, as well as our own portal, which is My Center, which is a tech-enabled support system where you have access to multiple resources, right? And so just quickly talking about the kinds of assessments and kind of certifications that we offer, which are all online. The first one is the teaching quotient, and which is a 100-mark paper where we test not just the subject part of it, we test the pedagogy and the communication skills of teachers, and each teacher taking that up also is they are also able to get a detailed report to understand where and how they have performed. Apart from that, there are center micro credentials where some of these competencies like content development or student assessment or early childhood education, these are certain skills or certain areas that competencies rather that we offer micro credentials in. And the third one is the teaching professionals Olympiad, which is an international competition for teachers, and where the teachers who rank at the top are awarded for their performance from leading organizations and leading professionals, and of course come out as the cream of at the top, right? So all of these assessments, we share verifiable digital badges which can be used for different sort of incentives, growth in career, and other such opportunities. Now, going back to My Center, or rather the kind of support that we also provide, the support is very personalized, and it's also through self-paced training. Now, the self-paced training has, through that we provide for extremely high quality free resources, as well as some of them are paid. So some, and in addition to that, we do have CENTA accredited programs where teachers can avail of these programs. There are full university linked postgraduate certificate programs like ones with Manipal uh, as a university, etc. Right? In addition, career development for teachers, the organizations who do look at CENTA's teaching quotient scores, identify, retain, and grow such teachers who do really well, or again whatever their parameters are. CENTA has spread sort of like the impact, and has been growing with our teacher community, and right now it's at 6 lakhs plus teaching community that we're working with, 90,000 plus schools and 6,000 plus locations, and some of them are outside of India as well. So that's CENTA in a nutshell. And yeah, let's move on. Um, so as for the agenda for today, the first section is overview of teaching competencies. Then we'll look at which teacher competency leads to what kind of student competencies, or what is the linkage there, right? And then the third section, as usual, is going to be the takeaway, and how you could avail of more resources on this. Let's look at the first section, which is overview of teacher competencies. All right. So now, in true CENTA style, let's utilize Mentimeter. This is again a very useful tool to use it in your classrooms as well. So what we'd request everyone to do is go on. If you are on your mobile phone, you can use any other browser to go on to www.menti.com. And we're starting off with a particular question. So go on to www.menti.com and enter the code 78798577. Um, and once you log on, we've also put that on the chat, and you should also be seeing that on your screen. It's fairly easy to get onto it. And once you get onto it, you should be able to see the first question, which is, what do you feel about teaching as a career? Right? So again, here we'd like to mention that there is no wrong or right answer in this. Pick what you feel is the closest option. So and there are 4 options given out there. I'll just read it in case you're not able to see it. Is it teaching is a high profile career with many growth opportunities? Is teaching or is it teaching does not have much career growth opportunity, though the work is interesting and satisfying? Or is it C, though teaching has some growth opportunities, they're often not based on merit? Or is it D, it is difficult for teachers or for teaching to have career growth because the role has to remain the same year on year for most people? So that's the question. I would request you to go on to Menti, and I see that about 6 of you have already responded. Again, please keep in mind there's no wrong or right. This is what you are choosing based on what you feel um, should be an answer for this question. What do you feel about teaching as a career? So we'll shortly display the question on the screen, but would encourage everyone to respond through Menti. We'll wait for a few more responses. We have about 13 of them. And please be comfortable using this tool, because this is again a great tool to use with your students. It has multiple functionalities to gauge your students as well. So please feel comfortable using this. Just waiting for a couple of more responses so that we could share how the responses look like. All right. Okay. So let's look at what are the different responses that we've received. I think you should be. Okay. All right. So based on all the response, that's quite few as compared to the number of people on that we see who have joined, and would encourage everyone to sort of keep answering. And good evening to everyone who are just joining. But we've just now that we have started, we encourage you to go to www.menti.com and use the code that's there on your screen, 78798577, and answer this question: what do you feel about teaching as a career? Choose whatever seems appropriate to you. Okay, so majority of you seem to have gone with the first option, which is teaching is a high-profile career with many growth opportunities. So that's great. Love the fact that a lot of you feel that way about teaching as a career. Several of you have gone with option B, which is teaching does not have much career growth opportunity, though work is interesting and satisfying, and we hope to we understand that, but we hope to sort of change that viewpoint through this webinar. All right. So again, it's quite encouraging to see that at least majority of those who few responded at least feel that it's a career that has many growth opportunities. It's a high profile career. So and of course, folks who feel that it is difficult for teaching to have career growth because the role has to remain the same year on year for most people. Again, while we say that there's no wrong or right answer, but we hope that your viewpoint about teaching as a career or as a profession changes as we move through this webinar today, right? So and the same goes for folks who are saying that though teaching has some growth opportunities, they are often not based on merit. Again, hoping to change that viewpoint as well. Now let's move on, and there's another question on Menti, the next one, which is, what do you feel about teaching competencies? Again, no wrong or right answer. Please stay on Menti itself, and the next question should come up for you. What do you feel about the next question is, what do you feel about teaching competencies? Is it A, teaching is an art whose competencies cannot be defined? Is it B, teaching does not involve any competencies, it is mainly about mindset? Or is it C, teaching has several competencies which need to be defined in a structured manner? Or is it D, teaching has several competencies which are already well understood by stakeholders? So again, no wrong or right answers, but what is it that you feel, and pick the closest one um, that you feel is appropriate for this question. Preeti ma'am says A. I hope it's for the second question. I don't see many people having responded to this. I think you'll have to move to the next question. No, on Mendy. Yeah. Okay, so we're getting a number of A's, quite a number of C's. Okay. Purnima ma'am, I think now you should be able to see the screen. See the question. If you're not able to see the question, request you to refresh your page. Manjula ma'am would request you to give one response. I know in the chat box it's easy to write, it's possible to write A and C, but using Menti, if you could also share which answer is actually most appropriate according to you. See a lot of A's in the chat box and C's, and as you can see on the screen, C, a lot of you think teaching has several competencies which need to be defined in a structured manner. Okay, followed by D and then B. We'll just give the rest of you a little more time. D and A, yeah, yeah. Okay, all right, great. So you can keep responding through Menti as well. So again, like we said, there is no wrong or right to this question. But a lot of you who have said teaching has several competencies which need to be defined in a structured manner. That's what we feel as well. So let's look at how these are defined in a structured manner, and let's move on with the next part, which is another question, and where we're asking you. And please stay on Menti. Will refresh the page for you in just a second. Um, what are competencies necessary for any teacher to have? So now that you have talked about what are different, what do you think about teaching as a profession and the teaching competencies, what are these competencies that are necessary for any teacher to have? And we already see a few responses: classroom management skills, communication. And when you talk about skills, if you could also just sort of like break that down for us a little bit. And type in your responses on Menti. So subject knowledge, thank you. So what are competencies necessary for any teacher to have? Think about, in terms of knowledge, values, skills, concept clarity, okay, resources. We're looking for some more answers. And okay, great. So interpersonal skills, okay. We're also looking, okay, love for students is something that's come up. Facilitation, great. So there are a lot of answers that are suddenly coming up. So reaching out to students, pedagogical skills, flexibility, transparent communication. I think find similar linkages in a lot of responses that you're giving, in the lines of knowledge, skills, and values that we are looking for, right? Right. So I think the bigger ones, like the ones that are highlighted in a bigger font, that is classroom management, communication skills, and subject knowledge. That's what a lot of you are actually saying, and hence, classroom management is something that's being shared by most of you. Hence, that's in the biggest font out there. Um, Followed by communication, and now subject knowledge seems to have taken over. But the others, while we see that there are some linkages, but those are individual responses as well. So even on the chat, we see a lot of responses coming in: skills, direction skills, skills of IT. So Deepa ma'am says involvement, clarity in subject, great. Knowledge, how learning takes place, growth mindset, Sylvia ma'am says, that's a great one. Communication, subject knowledge, strategies, student participation, so ability to connect to children. So I think, a lot of you are, while you have been very specific, you're also talking about different kinds of competencies that each one of you feel is necessary for any teacher to have, right? So okay, all right. So great to hear all your voices and opinion through these mentees polls. Let's now move on and see, how is it that we talked about what is, what does career growth mean in teaching as a profession, and what is it basically that you guys feel, and also how does that relate to competencies, right? So what differentiates a profession from a job, right? Now this is where we're talking about, with respect to teaching as a profession itself, or teaching as a career. Now how do we differentiate that, for teaching being just a job versus teaching being a profession? And here it's applicable to any field for that matter, right? Like you could take a doctor or an IT engineer or a manager. Now, only if you wish to have, or if you have this required set of competencies, and not just have those, right, but also have the willingness and approach to sort of grow those competencies from one level to the other? Do you actually see the value or the change in your approach to that profession? And here in this case it is teaching, to seeing that it is a profession for me rather than just a job for me, right? So competencies, we're looking at how we are growing in them, and hence that correlates to how we can have growth in our career, right? So just as an example, now I, as a teacher, could go into my class, read from the same textbook that I've been reading since day one, and even in my 15th year of teaching, I could continue to read from the textbook in the same manner to any batch that comes in. Now, that's the only approach that I have been putting in, and that's because that I'm only considering that as a job. But if I look at how I want to grow as a teacher, and I need to be able to look at what are the competencies that I need, right? So I need to be able to connect what is there in the textbook to how the students are learning out of it, right? And what is it that I need to do or I need to have so that I'm able to translate that into learning outcomes in students, right? So not just reading, but maybe I need to bring in new resources to break the concept down for my students. I need to make it more application oriented. What they are reading in this textbook or writing in their notebooks needs to be taken out into the real world, and how that can be sort of implemented, as well as now that I've learned how to do that, how can I take it a notch higher? How do I communicate well? How do I talk to students so that they understand me in the most effective manner? And hence, that's my intent, to actually grow from one competency, or within that competency, grow from one level to the other. And where at one point I was just looking at it as a job, because it was just helping me, fulfill some of my needs. But right now I'm looking at it as a profession, because I'm not just adding value to people who I'm working with, but I'm also adding value to my own career, right? And that's how my growth in my career is getting aided, right? And a lot of you are actually putting in some great thoughts over there in the chat box. Continuous improvement. Job is probably, as Manjari ma'am says, job is just for money, and profession is for passion. I think, love that analogy. Well, a lot of profession, or a lot of like career options can have that connection as well. They're interconnected. Bring in creative ways of learning style. Teaching is fun and a big responsibility, and also serving the society, Shraddha ma'am says. Job is for satisfaction, finances to support yourself. Okay. Extra knowledge have to share. Vishwajit sir says teaching has a scope for learning and changing the lives. Yet, do teachers are teachers protected? Not a single child in the class aims for becoming a teacher in the future. Why is it so? Well, we're all here to try and change that for our students, right, sir? So let's see how that can change, how our approach towards this career changes, and as well as how we're able to change that for students. So all right, so after this, let's actually move into connecting the dots. And for section 2, I'd invite Shruti to sort of start the next section.
I hope I'm audible. Just unmuted myself. Great. Thank you so much, Upasana. Welcome, everyone. Very, very happy to see so many of you join us today, another Tuesday. So it's been a great journey with all of you. We're hoping to learn from you as much as we are hoping you're learning from us. And in the previous section, let's do a quick recap of what we just covered, right? So we looked at teacher competencies more broadly, and we also looked at how that connects to career, right? And I saw many of you pick the option for how teaching, or rather career growth in teaching, happens based on merit and not based on competencies, right? And which is what, like, we are trying to change. We are trying to say that only when we identify teaching as a profession and look at it as competencies, there's growth in competencies, and this growth in competencies is what leads to change in career. This is when the shift happens from career growth happening instead of merit, instead of influence or some other reasons. but happening instead of merit, happening with merit, right? Because you deserve it, because you have grown in terms of your competencies. So I think that is the kind of mindset we're also trying to bring in how we look at teaching as a profession. And also, many of you shared a lot of different beautiful competencies that teachers should be having. And again, we looked at it in silos, right? These were all different competencies that many of you kind of typed in, and it kind of showed on the screen, and we saw very good ones. But now, in we did discuss even in the Mentimeter quiz that teaching competencies are there, they exist, but they need to be defined in a structured way. So what you put up in the Mentimeter was a testimony to the fact that teacher competencies exist. Right now, how do we put that in a structured, defined way? We will look at that in this section. And we'll also look at the connection between teacher competencies and how these lead to student competencies. And therefore, on that note, let's begin this section. So before we move any further, right, I would love to share a few, and then I would love all of you to share in the chat box as well. What are some student competencies that are fundamental or that are very important in the current and the future world? What are some examples of student competencies? I will list down some, and then you can use the chat box to list down more. Students need to understand what they are learning. They should not just be recalling at a cognitive level. If you remember Bloom's, they should not be at a remember or a recall. They should be able to understand what they are studying. Critical thinking. Students should be able to critically think about every situation or whatever they are learning and think beyond what's in the textbook or what's shared with them. Interpersonal skills. Someone listed this as a skill for a teacher. Very important for a teacher, but equally important for a student to have in the current and future world. And it's always been important. The ability to learn, again, continuous learning, right? Just like how as adults we want to continuously learn, as students, learning should not be something that happens because I have to do it, but rather something that they want to do on their own, right? Problem solving, again, very closely linked to critical thinking. Problem solving, very, very important competency for students to have. Now, like to invite all of you to add more in the chat box. Can you think of few more student competencies that are important and relevant in the current and future world? So I'll be looking at the chat box. So I can see Josie, ma'am or sir say analytical, logical thinking. Okay. Application of the knowledge. Anshuman sir says being able to apply knowledge, not just having a conceptual understanding, also being able to apply. Amandeep sir says or ma'am says creativity, not rote memorization, but creativity. Great, great point. Communication skills, interest in learning, yes. Problem solving, being able to create content, of course. I mean, that would be an extremely high at a cognitive level. If you look at Bloom's, that's literally at the topmost level, so that would be ideal. But very high level skill. Higher order thinking in general, very good. Multiple intelligence, again, that's more like a theory that kind of caters to children, like caters to diversity in children. Emotional adjustment, that's a very good point, Asha ma'am. Like maybe having an emotional quotient, not just IQ but also EQ, which is extremely relevant in today's world. Great, I see Indu ma'am also say EQ. Digital skill, life skills, great, great point, Hosina ma'am. Interactive learning, very, very relevant to not just post COVID, of course. Like ICT has been point of relevance, so it's been important for a long time now, but became even more kind of accelerated during COVID. Listening to respond, great point, Usha ma'am. Inquiry based learning, problem solving, collaboration. Yeah, I see a lot of similar points as well, and I see a lot of great points that many of you are sharing. Yeah, so some of these socio-emotional skill, great point. So yeah, so a lot of these are extremely important student competencies, right? Of course, we are saying in the context of current and future world, but they have always been relevant, and some of these we have adapted to based on changing times. Great. So now that we know that these are some of the student competencies that are relevant, we will of course be looking at, therefore, what are some teacher competencies that can lead to these? There are several more you listed in the chat box. But before that, let's think about how do we think about teacher competencies in a structured way, right? We all agreed that yes, teacher competencies exist, or majority of us agreed that teacher competencies do exist, but they need to be defined in a structured way, right? So the good news is that this thought is not something that's new. It's been there for years together, and we as CENTA also originated as an organization keeping this vision or thought process in mind, right? Like we need to be able to define teacher competencies in a structured way. So, of course, I'm just going to list down some of the several entities who have actually thought about this and come up with a very well defined, globally researched, and globally applicable structured way of structured list or framework of teacher competencies. So in India, CENTA is actually the first entity to come up with this, which is established in 2015. So in India, when CENTA decided to do this, there actually was no other teacher competency framework that existed. There was no structured way of looking at what a teacher's career, a teacher's life cycle would look like, what are some competencies they need to work on. But of course, now we have the government approved National Professional Standards for Teachers, which is being developed by NCTE. And CENTA Standards is fully aligned with NPST that's being developed, and it's going to be released in the next year or two. And then let's look at some international standards as well, right? So it's great to see that India, in our like at a government level, professional standards are going to be structured, but there are several other countries that have been doing this from years, right? For example, Australian professional standards for teachers is an example. Singapore is another example, which has been doing a very structured way of professional development of teachers and standardized way of structuring teacher competencies. Then there's also Dubai, KHDA, the association in Dubai, which again does this in a very structured way. So this is not, the point of this slide is to say that this is not something which is new. Structured way of thinking about teacher competencies. This is something that's been there for quite some time. In India, it's something that we're trying to more and more make it normalized or regulate it. But it has always been there, the structured way of thinking about teacher competencies, right? And for the scope of this session, we are actually going to look at one entity, which is CENTA Standards. Of course, we come from this organization, so we know it very well, how the teacher competency framework has been structured at CENTA. And we will, in this section, be using CENTA Standards to do a very hands-on practical activity with all of you as well. So before we move on to the actual exercise that we all will be doing as a group, let me quickly give you a short introduction about CENTA standards, right? So CENTA standards are a widely accepted and used teacher competency framework, which teachers can basically use like a rubric or a checklist for themselves at different stages of their career. It's a competency framework that teachers can use, not a performance framework. So CENTA standards basically corresponds to three levels. L1, which corresponds to a new teacher, L2, which corresponds to an experienced teacher, and L3, a senior teacher. So L2 and L3 are basically an experienced senior teacher. L1 is for a new teacher who has just, joined the profession, and it need not be like, I mean, even a teacher 10 years in their career could be at L1 if, according to the competency framework, their competencies are at an L1 level. So it's not set in stone that if a teacher has 10 years of experience, in CENTA standard, she would come fit under L2. She could still fit under L1. So yeah, so that's very largely about the overview. The framework is divided into three sections. But what are the main competencies that the CENTA standards cover? So in the Mentimeter, all of you mentioned a lot of different competencies: subject knowledge, classroom communication, assessments, then like belief in students, loving students. All of these different points were mentioned. I mean, I'm happy to let you all know that most of these are covered in CENTA standards, but they all fit in different buckets, right? So let's look at what those competency buckets or categories are. So CENTA standards cover technical competencies, which are basically competencies specific to teaching as a profession. Every profession, if you think about it, has a certain set of technical skills. Like an engineer's technical skills would be, he's a software engineer, he or she, they would need to have coding skills. Right? They would need to have skill being able to visualize what is the app they're developing, something along those lines, right? Similarly, what are the technical competencies a teacher needs to have? Professional competencies. This is more about competencies that are relevant for effective interactions in any professional environment. Just because I know coding and I have no communication skills, or I have no, like teamwork skills or collaborative skills, then I'm not going to be a good professional, right? So, what are some of these professional skills? Core competencies. What are fundamental competencies of an individual? As an individual, what are some core skills I need to have? What are like language skills? How I express myself, writing skills. These are what core competencies cover. We'll be looking at all of them in a bit more detail. And then comes mindsets, right? This is something that is based on one's own experience, one's own beliefs, which is the attitudes and beliefs that you come in with. So CENTA standards in a nutshell is has three levels and has these four main competencies, which are further broken down. But we will do each of these sections together using an exercise. So for this exercise, actually, I'll just leave this screen on for a minute so that you all are able to. Many of you, by the way, may already be familiar with the CENTA standards. It's a public resource. It's freely available on our website as well. But for those who are not, it's important for you to know that this is an example of a structured, defined teacher competency framework, right? So there are four big categories: technical, professional, core, and mindsets. And then each of these competencies or categories have several subcategories or aspects that it covers, which we will be looking at shortly. So I want to ask, how many of you are familiar with this framework or are able to relate to what the standards cover, right, in terms of the big buckets? You can use the chat box to just share, or you can also think of examples. When I say technical competencies, which are competencies specific to teaching, as a professional, I also gave an example. Can you think of, for a teacher, what these could be? Similarly, what are some examples of professional competencies? Can you think of it? Of course, we're going to share this with you shortly, but I just want to gauge as an audience, like how much do we already know? Similarly, core competencies. What are some fundamental things, competencies any individual should be having? And similarly, mindsets. So I'm quickly going to come back to the chat box. And I want to see some examples of, okay, let's look at examples of technical competencies. What are some examples? So Richa ma'am says taking classes online is a technical competency. Great point, ma'am. So yes, being able to, how you are as an online teacher, online educator is a technical skill. Agreed. So thinking skill, growth mindset, Surama ma'am is telling. So do you think that's a technical skill? Or is that coming under mindsets? Anshuman sir says how to write in the blackboard. So again, is that a technical skill that a teacher should have? How to write in a blackboard? Maybe that's the most primitive way of saying it, and they could like we mainly mean knowing how to use the blackboard, how to use a pedagogical resource like the blackboard in the right way. Okay. Use of smart boards, using interactive boards. Okay, Purnima ma'am says content knowledge. That's a great technical skill. Okay, now let's look at some examples of professional skills. As a teacher, what are some professional skills you should be having? Sudeepa ma'am says using latest edtech. Okay, that could come under technical skills again. What about professional skills? What are some, let's move on to professional skills. What are some examples of professional skills? Communication, empathy. Okay. Are these professional, or would you say, Sumitra ma'am, they are core skills that any individual should anyway have? Communication skills, is it relevant only to teaching as a profession or general? Accountability is a good one, is a good professional skill, Mosina ma'am. Completing work on time, I saw that. Leadership, excellent. Deadlines, meeting deadlines, presentation skills, great. Okay. So I'm seeing some great examples on the chat box. Time management, great skill, Nazia, a great example of a professional competency. Great. So this is what we mean when we say professional. Let's move on to core. What are some competencies you as an individual should be having? So I saw many of you say communication. That is a core skill, right? I should be able to speak the right way. I should be able to write the right way for any profession that I am in. So that would be a core skill. What else could be a core competency? Knowing how to present, I think all of that would still be technical. Generating online reports is one I saw. Just having technology awareness, right? Knowing how to use a computer, knowing how to use different word tools, MS Office tools, for example, right? That's a great core skill that you should be. Empathy, compassion, many of you are listing these down. These would come more under mindset because that's the mindset you should be operating with. But yes, under core competency, being sensitive to students, that would be a core skill. How sensitive you are to students' needs, how much you are able to listen to what students share, how clearly you express what you want to share with them. These are examples of core skills, and I think mindsets is pretty self-explanatory, right? It's about how much you believe in students, then how you set high standards for students, how proactive you are, having a continuous learning. We saw growth mindset, continuous learning mindset, great examples of just the mindset parameter or competency, right? Great. So thank you so much for sharing. So just with the inputs you've given on the chat box, I feel like we are already aligned in terms of what are the competencies that a teacher requires and how the CENTA standards are structured around that. Now I request all of you, so usually we share a takeaway in the end. For this exercise, I request all of you to go to this link and download this document because we will be needing it for the rest of the session. So would request all of you to go to this link, which is put in the chat box shortly, and download the CENTA standards document, and I'll tell you what we will be doing with this. So would request all of you to download the CENTA standards document, and once you're done, please on the chat box, maybe you can put a yes or a done. So looking for some yeses and dones once you have been able to download. Great, I can see that two of you have already, Aparna ma'am and Savya ma'am have already been able to download it. Great, I can see more dones, great. We'll wait for another 10 seconds and then we can continue. So the document should look something like this. CENTA standards, and then there are few concept pages which you can read about later. And I'd request all of you to come to page 5. Would request all of you to scroll through the pages and come to page 5. Great. So just keep that handy. So now I'll explain a little bit about how the next section is going to work, right? So we are just quickly going to take you. So many of you shared in the chat box what you think is covered in technical competencies. We are now going to share, at least at CENTA, what we cover under technical competencies. And of course, this is fully aligned with global research and all these international standards that were already pre-existing before the CENTA standards. Taking inputs from all of them, CENTA standards has been created. So it's quite comprehensive. We will look at what technical competencies we are covering, and after that we will ask you two questions. So we will be asking you a question. You will have to use this PDF that you have downloaded, right? You will have to go through it and you will have to put down your answers in the chat box. Similarly for the next question, and then we'll do a quick debrief. Then we'll move on to professional competencies. So we'll repeat the same exercise for technical competencies, professional competencies, core and mindsets. So think of this more like a reflective exercise. So we want all of you to actually interact with this document and participate in the session in the sense that you're kind of reflecting about your own teaching competencies, your own career and structuring. We are helping you structure that, right? Like your own competencies and where you are at the moment and how this also correlates to student outcomes. So the point of the session is how teaching competencies leads to student competencies. So we will be using this exercise to actually derive what are teacher competencies which are relevant or required to lead to student outcomes. So I'm hoping most of you have been able to download the CENTA Standards Framework. Great. Okay, so now let's move on. Like I mentioned, we'll start with our exercise now. So first we will be moving on to technical competencies. We will quickly look at what are the various aspects. The aspects, I mean, if you consider technical competency to be one category, let's look at the various subcategories within technical competencies. And also within that, what are some parameters that are getting covered, right? So there's quite a few here. So we'll just do it one by one by one. And every time I'm not going to, wherever possible, I'll be listing down examples as well. But in the standards document, it is given in a lot more detail, but for the scope of this session, we will not be going into the level of detail that the standards document has. We'll be looking at it from a more of a snapshot or overview level. Okay, and then of course we will help you navigate through the rest of it also. We'll come to that in the end at the end of the session. Okay, so technical competencies. The first technical competencies as a teacher that is a must is expertise in one's subject, right? Subject expertise. And within this, the parameters or the standards that we call at CENTA, we call subject expertise as an aspect. And these are the various standards that are covered within, or this is rather a competency, subject expertise, and the various aspects covered under that are subject knowledge, conceptual understanding, application, and subject purpose. So you as a teacher, firstly, do you have knowledge of your subject? Can you conceptually, do you have conceptual understanding of the various concepts? Can you as a teacher apply it to a different context, to different a piece of content, etc.? And do you understand the purpose of your subject? Like, do you understand the purpose of history? For example, right? Why do you teach history to students? Or do you understand the purpose of basic fundamental math? Why are we teaching that? How does that integrate with other subjects? Right? What is the purpose of teaching a specific concept? Are you as a teacher clear about it? Next, the next technical competency that a teacher should have is understanding of child learning and diversity. SC, UC, whatever you're seeing are just tags that we use for different competencies. But very important that you understand your child learning and diversity. And in this, there's learning theories and learner diversity, right? Learning theories like, do I know what are principles of cognitivism? I may not know the exact terminology, cognitivism, constructivism, etc. But do I know what the principles are? What are these fundamental theories telling about how we should teach children, right? Or how different children learn. Learner diversity, like what is the range of spectrum of children that we have in our classroom? How is each student different from the other, etc. Then content development and planning. Very important. Many of you also listed this in the Mentimeter activity. So under this, we have several aspects, right, that we need to have in terms of technical competencies. There's learning objectives. Do I understand what is how to write what a well-written learning objective is? Do I know how to frame learning objectives for different topics I'm teaching? Pedagogical methods. Do I know what method to use? Should I directly teach children? Should I use like a flipped classroom method? What are resources? Should I use a graphic organizer for this topic? Should I ask students to directly write from the board, etc.? Pedagogical content knowledge is, do I understand within the topic itself, how does one topic lead to the another? What is the pedagogical linkage or sequence between topics, between different subjects? Content creation, planning for instruction, coaching on content and planning, which is of course very high level, right? You coach others on content and development and planning. Then comes again very important student assessment and remediation, and within this, these are some aspects which are very important technical competencies for a teacher to possess. Assessment purpose, methods, tools, do I know, like we discussed, of course, from session 1 we have spoken about assessment purposes, right? Like, do I want to do a formative assessment, summative, or do I want to do it as a diagnostic to understand how to teach, what to teach? What are the methods I'm using? Am I using a subjective or objective? What tools I'm using? Am I using an MCQ, fill in the blank? What am I using, an online tool, pen and paper, etc., right? How am I designing and implementing? So yeah, the online pen and paper, etc., is more also about how you're implementing it as a teacher. What insights am I getting from student assessments? Every assessment should give us an insight, only then is it well designed, right? Remediation and feedback. How do I remediate misconceptions? How do I give students good feedback? How do I then coach others once I've mastered essay 1 to 4? How do I then coach others on the same skills? Classroom communication. Again, I saw a lot of you mention classroom management. Fits in the same bucket as classroom communication. So you can see that classroom management techniques, delivery of content, how you involve students, your pacing, how you provide individual attention. Online classroom, very important, very relevant in the current scenario. So even CENTA standards has evolved over the years. Online classroom was not there earlier. And in our fourth version, this is something that we have newly added as well. Coaching on classroom delivery, tech in ed, right? Technology in education, which was already very important, but more so now. So ICT in teaching learning and ICT beyond the classroom. What can I do within the classroom using tech? What can I use outside the classroom for students to do on their own? Also, very important is life skills integration, right? Again, very relevant to the current scenario that we are in, which is the 21st century skills. Creativity, critical thinking, decision making, continuous learning, social emotional skills, communication, collaboration, empathy, right? So this in a nutshell is are what technical competencies that a teacher should have. This is not what this is not what students should have, right? This is something we eventually need to build in students, but this is more for you as a professional. What are some skills which are technical for your profession? In our case, it is teachers. So take a good look at this. If you look at page 5 of the document that you have downloaded, you will see that the technical competencies sections has the same thing. You'll see blue boxes, which are basically each of these aspects, and within that, each of these competencies, and within that, aspects respective to that competency. So take a minute and go through this, and also go through page number 5 of that document, because now I'm going to be asking 2 questions that all of you should be answering. So for those who are not able to download it at the moment, maybe you can just take a quick picture of this screen that we can use for the next two exercises. So those who are able to download it, great. If you're not able to download, maybe you can just take a picture of this. Okay, great. So now the first question that we want to ask all of you is, so we spoke about student competencies in general, right? And we also now looked at a structured way of teacher competencies. We looked at one category, which is technical competencies. Now, out of this entire list of technical competencies that you saw, what do you think is important for driving student outcomes? Out of this list, these are very specific to you as a teacher, right? You as a teacher need to have all of these. But if you think about it from the lens of driving student outcomes or driving student competencies, which one of these are you think are most important? So you can just in the chat box literally pick out from this list and put it down in the chat box. Which out of these do you think are directly relevant or important or drive student outcomes? So you can refer to the page number 5 in the PDF that you have downloaded. And you can see subject expertise, understanding of child learning, content, and you can see all the aspects and covered over there for each competency. So you just pick out from there and put in the chat box. Which one of these do you think are important to drive student outcomes? So by that we mean which of them are important to help you actually help students get competencies of their own, develop competencies of their own, grow in those, and eventually give us the results that we want, or like lead to good student outcomes. So I see a lot of you talking about assessment and remediation. Okay, so Sri Lakshmi ma'am, if it's blurred, just zoom it in a bit, or like maybe zoom out. I can also share my screen, but I will not be able to see your comments then. So I can see that Sumitra ma'am says assessment and remediation. Mrinalini ma'am says learning objectives. So if your learning objectives are clear, then students will know exactly what is expected from them in each lesson, because they know clearly what the objectives of the lesson or the topic is. So Kalpana ma'am says technology in education. Okay. So Vijayalakshmi ma'am, I would ask you to stick to the technical competencies, what we just discussed now, right? Sudeepa ma'am says all. Great. So Richa ma'am says subject knowledge and critical thinking. So important for you, for the teacher to know their subject very well and to be able to think critically to pass that on to students. Okay. Purnima ma'am says if a teacher is a critical thinker, then only students become critical thinker. I mean, yes, we do model it a lot for them, right? What we do, they kind of feed off of that and do it. So I don't want, so Surama ma'am and Moisina ma'am, I don't want all of you looking at the overall thing. Please don't do that. Just look at the technical competency section. Just that, and just with that section, which is literally the blue, 30% of the screen on page 5, just look at that and list down what do you think is relevant to drive student outcomes. So Marceline ma'am says assessment, like being able to assess and remediate correctly, right? Gives the right student assessment, get good insights from it, and then remediate to give feedback and use that data in the most proactive and productive way possible. Assessment and remediation. So I see a lot of you sharing assessments, learning objectives and assessments as two very, very important aspects or competencies that are most important to be able to drive student outcomes. So understanding the learning outcome, great. So what about classroom communication, classroom management. I'm surprised to see many of you have not shared that. It could also be because that feels like something that's happening in the class versus overall outcomes, right? Which are like more like for the student to understand. But also, if you think about it, classroom communication has aspects like how the teacher is delivering the content. Is she keeping all the student context in mind, thinking about all of them? How she's involving, or she or he is involving different students? How they are actually using specific techniques to manage specific sets of students so that other everybody can understand what's being taught. Great. Okay. So I see a lot of great points of. So Sudeepa ma'am again says that she feels all of them are relevant to drive student outcomes. Not denying that, but of course, as a teacher, specific teachers, different teachers may think different competencies are relevant in their context. Great. So that is more about we are reflecting with keeping the student in mind, right? So keeping the student in mind, we know that many of you shared that learning objectives very important, a student assessment remediation very important, and also having subject knowledge or expertise in your own subject is very important. So that is important for driving student outcomes. Now let's come to the next section. Think about yourself now, right? You as teachers, out of these competencies, where do you feel you stand? Like what do you think you have mastered? Out of these, what do you think is something that you are very good at or you are comfortable with or you know that you have this competency? Don't Let's not look at the progression of it. So don't go beyond page 5. Just look at page 5 and again pick out under, for example, you may think under subject expertise you have excellent subject knowledge and conceptual understanding of your subject, but your application skills may not be the best as a teacher. Then I will only list down subject knowledge, conceptual understanding, right? Similarly, as a teacher, I always know what is the objective of every lesson that I'm teaching and I communicate that with students, but I may not be the best at creating content. So then that is not something you would list down. So think about yourself as a teacher and look at each of the peach or pink color boxes or blue color boxes in the PDF and think what holds good for you. So I'm waiting for. So Marceline ma'am says delivery of content is something that she thinks she is able to do, which she stands very well when it comes to that. What else? Others, rest of the teachers, right? Think about yourself as a teacher and your own technical competencies. What are some of the technical competencies we have listed that you feel you have mastered or you're quite good at? Sylvia ma'am says application, I'm assuming application of subject and communication. By that I mean under 21st century skills. So Pratna ma'am says classroom communication is something she's mastered. So, or she's quite comfortable with, quite good at. Jayashree ma'am says life skills integration, integrating 21st century skills in her classrooms. So Mohsina ma'am says she's confident in formulating learning outcomes. So I hope every class of yours, ma'am, or every chapter has a series of objectives that you've clearly listed down and sharing with students. Mrinalini ma'am says subject knowledge and creating content. Great. So you must be a very good content creator then in your school or a curriculum developer if you know the knowledge of your subject and your skill is creation of content. Simple ma'am says pedagogical method, which method to use for which topic, which lesson. Great. So yeah, so I see a lot of you. Anshuman sir says tech in ed is something that's a skill here. Sejal ma'am says TECC and SE, which is subject expertise, classroom communication, and tech. All of these are some of the skill sets that she has. Great. So I can see some great answers on the chat, and which shows that all of you are thinking about yourselves, right, as teachers and your own teaching practices, and you're thinking about where you stand when it comes to these competencies, when it comes to technical competencies. Great. So I would suggest, like I would request all of you to not stop for the scope of this session, but also beyond the session, go back and again relook at all the technical competencies that we have listed down and think about and reflect about yourself and what is it that I have versus what is it that I don't have, because this is an exhaustive list of technical competencies that every teacher should be having, not just a combination or few of these, but any teacher should be having all of these. It's not just one or two out of this, right? It's all of this that a teacher should be having. And I'll leave you with that thought. And on this note, I'll request Upasana to take over again, and I'll see you for section 3.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Shruti. Okay. I think there's a part left for the technical competency. Shruti, do you want to just quickly go through the examples as well?
Yeah. I hope I'm audible. Yeah. So there was a section that we do want to debrief with all of you before we move on to professional competencies, where Upasana will take over. Okay, so we now discussed about, from our students' point of view, how to correlate teacher competencies to student outcomes. You all did that in this exercise. We also spoke about, therefore, what are some competencies I as a teacher already possess, right? Now, look from all of your answers, what's important, and also looking at the standards itself, right? What's important for you to note, for us to note as teachers, is that things that are important for new teachers versus experienced teachers. The expectations from a new teacher are not going to be same as an experienced teacher, right? Which is L1 in CENTA standards versus an L2 or L3. The expectations are different. Basically, what is practical for a new teacher to have versus things that require experience to build. For example, many of you share that subject knowledge is a skill that you already possess, right? You're very confident about it, and that is expected out of any new teacher as well. Like any new teacher that comes in needs to have strong subject knowledge. But being able to differentiate the content for different students based on their learning patterns, or being able to adapt your lesson plan for your lesson, keeping student context in mind, these are things that require experience to build. So even if you see further in the standards, it clearly differentiates what's expected from a new teacher versus an experienced one. Similarly, what builds with practice and experience, right? Basically, in terms of what is it that I'm already able to, what is it that's given to me? Can I execute that versus do I know how to adapt the lesson that I have been given according to my students? Or can I modify my language according to or how I deliver the content, delivery style according to my students? What needs to be done inside the classroom versus what can be done outside, right? As a teacher, an expectation is, for example, if you take assessments, as a teacher, you should be able to get insights from your students. Based on their performance in a test, you should be able to understand how many students have understood a concept, how many haven't, who needs remediation, what's the kind of feedback I need to give. This is something that's based on that assessment that you administered. It's done inside the classroom, and a new teacher is expected to be able to do this versus what can be done outside. So if a teacher is asked to design an assessment, or if there is a policy that's been, like that a chapter or specific delivery method has to be used, a specific pedagogical method or resource has to be used, or an assessment that's created for several sections, that's something that an experienced teacher is expected and a new teacher may not be expected to do. And also being able to select, use, implement versus create, right? You are able to select or use the lesson that's given to you, lesson plan given to you, the assessment given to you, versus can you create one for your own students because you know their context in and out now, or you have years of experience to know what works versus what doesn't, right? So even when we're looking at what are some competencies we have versus we don't, think of how it progresses from a new to an experienced teacher. And this is what we mean when we say there is a growth in competencies. So what's expected from a new teacher, it evolves when when the teacher becomes more and more experienced. So now we'll repeat the same exercise for professional competencies, and Upasana will be taking over for this section. So over to you, Upasana.
All right. Thank you, Shruti. So I think you have already seen what those professional competencies refer to. So we'll just quickly go through some of those, and in the interest of time, we'll also sort of talk about core competencies and mindset in a combined fashion, right? So I'd request all of you to sort of keep referring to that document, the downloaded document, and the second part of page 5, right? So professional competencies, as we understand now, involve, like, are broken down into multiple aspects, right? So self development, then we come to, if we can just keep moving on, teamwork and leadership skills, right? And we look at different levels of those. Positive relationship with students, so defining how our relationship with our students is. Involvement of parents in community, and problem solving abilities, work planning and time management. A lot of you actually spoke about it. And understanding of policies and student safety. Now these are broad categories, or rather the aspects that we are breaking professional competencies, so it's so that it's very, very explicit and measurable in based on where we stand with respect to our own professional growth, right? Remember, we spoke about what is it that distinguishes a profession from a job, right? So taking it back from there to this, right? So self development, again, are you I'm just taking a few examples in the interest of time. So self development for a new teacher, it could look like, are they able to reflect on their own classroom, or on the way they have conducted their own class? Whereas for someone who is more experienced, it could look like, whether they are able to help in professional growth or knowledge sharing, like they're able to bring in those initiatives. For a new teacher, the TL competency or teamwork and leadership skill could look like, are they able to work within the team? Are they able to, follow the norms? Whereas someone who is experienced, it could look like, are they being an effective leader? Are they able to lead a certain group of new teachers, right? So like we explained, professional competencies, it's very if you look at it, it's a very broad term, but these are various competencies that we sort of break them into. Right now, what is important for driving student outcomes? Now, of course, we've started to understand that these professional competencies are relevant for us to grow as teachers, but how do these actually drive student outcomes, right? So if we could just have quick sharing on the chat box itself to say, and Shruti, if you can just go back to the previous slide for reference. So if you could give examples of any of these professional competencies, and how do you see that being aligned to the student outcomes, right? So we gave a couple of examples with SD and TL, but if you could share in terms of what would that look like when you had to use this competency to link it to a student outcome. So which, and you could pick any, right? So Raja sir says activities, okay. Teamwork among peers, thank you Purnima ma'am. Core competencies, so Nana ma'am, we're looking at professional competencies right now, and out of these that are listed, and you could also refer to the PDF that may be in front of you, out of those professional competencies, how do you see that linking to student learning outcomes? So teamwork is another one that we are continuously seeing. All right, so let's go and look at like some of these examples, right? So okay, so let's assess ourselves like the way we did it in technical competencies. Where do you think you rate yourself as with respect to these professional competencies? With respect to whether it's self development, teamwork, or is it PS? Your involvement with parents and community. Which one out of these competencies do you think you are able to rate yourself the highest when it comes to these professional competencies? Just name it in the chat box. Which of these competencies. You don't really have to say, okay. Anshuman sir says TL, PS, and RP, so he feels he is great at teamwork and leadership. positive relationship with students, RP, within, parents and community. Great. A lot of you are actually talking about PS, which is, developing good relationship with students. Connects back to some of the comments that you had shared earlier. Mohsina ma'am is confident in work planning and time management. Great, great. So, yeah. Okay, all right. So there's, I think on this slide there is a small typo. We apologize for that, but it's accurate on the PDF. So for positive relationship with students, the main aspect should be RS instead of PS. I think if you refer to the PDF, I think that's accurate. So RS instead of PS, right? So okay, great. So we see a lot of you saying PS, SD. So PS, I'm assuming it's RS. Positive relationship with work planning. We also see Sejal ma'am says SECCTS. So SE and CC are still with the technical competencies, and we're not now talking about professional competencies. Okay, now let's look at how these measure for a new teacher versus experienced teacher, similar to the exercise that Shruti did with us in the technical competencies. What is practical for a new teacher to have versus things that require experience to build? Very a quick example would be leadership, teamwork and leadership. As a new teacher, and a lot of you actually shared, as a new teacher, you would be expected to sort of work with the team, understand how the norms are playing out and work according to those, versus as an experienced teacher, you are the one who's actually helping in building those norms out, right? Similarly, what builds with practice and experience? Same examples, right? Like, so you practice those norms, and as you gain more experience, as you become more proficient in those competencies, you actually become someone who helps building those norms, right? So time management, you may be someone who follows a schedule initially, but then as you grow in experience, you may be the one who is creating that timetable, or a sort of a work plan schedule for your team. What needs to be done inside the classroom versus what can be done outside. So here again, you could talk about reflection of your teaching practices, right? So the first aspect that we had, so as a teacher, new teacher, I am responsible for my own classroom, and so I should be able to effectively reflect upon the practices that I implemented and the outcome that it had. Versus if I'm an experienced teacher, I should be able to help newer teachers in my organization or my school to build those reflective practices, right? And how can reflection be done? And then finally, the distinction between new and experienced teachers is being able to select, use, implement versus create. And I think we already spoke about a couple of things, right? Like work plan schedules, or even like for that matter, you're helping them create some sort of like initiative. So you parents teachers meeting are a classic example. As a new teacher, I remember following the protocols to the T, and ensuring that I'm meeting the parents and I'm meeting the teachers, the students, as per what the procedure is. Whereas as an experienced teacher, you would be someone who would help develop those initiatives or engagement methodologies to meet with parents and students in the most effective manner, right? So that's how professional competencies play out in a real life situation. Quickly talking about core competencies and mindset again, these are skills that we, or competencies that, as you can see on the PDF, that these are not competencies where we would want to have levels, right? And it's because these are what we expect that you come in with, and you only grow from there, right? A logical ability, communication skills, technological awareness, you have to come in with some amount of like ability to derive logic out of a situation, or be able to communicate in a particular language, or have that sense of like expression, clarity in expression, and you can only grow from there, right? Similarly with mindsets, now if we talk about mindset and you look at MS2, which is belief in all students. I could come in, I need to come in as someone who overall believes that it's possible for all students to do well, right? Whereas, and I can only grow from there, right? Otherwise, if I just come in with a very artificial sort of thought process, or I come in with an expectation that no, none of the students can actually do well, then where am I growing from there, right? So that does not work at all. Similarly, I need to be able to understand that parents and the community play an important role in actually developing students, and that's the mindset that I need to come in with, and I can only grow from there, right? So with core competencies and mindsets, the what is important, how do they connect, is basically that, again, required for all teachers irrespective of the levels that they are at. Now this is important, and the way we are connecting this is by seeing that we are trying to build, we need to be demonstrating the same skills and values that we want to build in our students, right? And all of us are focused on building 21st century skills, and these need to be aligned to those as well. So I know we're sort of like running out of time right now, but that's in a snapshot of all our center standard competencies. Shruti, if you could just quickly talk about the takeaways. Meanwhile, I'll share the feedback link.
Sure, Upasna. I mean, like I said, thank you so much for completing the section. And we discussed in a nutshell the technical competencies, what that entails, the professional competencies, core competencies, and mindsets. Of course, we did want to discuss with you what are some core competencies and mindsets that you already have, but as teachers, if we do not come, these are like certain hygiene or basic fundamental things we need to come in with, right? The core and the core competencies and the mindsets. And if we don't have that, we maybe we're not even in the right profession. So how do we, if we are here and we want to be here, how do we have that basic skills and just grow from there? So, with respect to the takeaway, it's the same document that you have, except now what we want in today's session, we just looked at it at a very overview level, right? We didn't look at it at an L1, L2, or L3 level, which is L1 being new, L2 senior, and L experience, and L3 being an experienced teacher. What we want all of you to go back with, it's the same CENTA standard, so it's the same link also. We don't have, I mean, we can paste it in the chat box, the same link, and you can go and download it. We want you to look at the levels now. You can see the screenshot here, right? Scroll down to further pages, and you'll see each technical competency and each aspect divided into further aspects, and for each competency rather divided into further aspects, and each aspect has defined, like how a rubric would define this frame. This is a framework. It's clearly defined what is expected from an L1 teacher, L2 teacher, and L3 teacher, right? So it'll be a great exercise for you to go through each of these technical, professional, core competencies and mindsets, and look at where you would place yourself. This is more like a rating, where you would place yourself at the moment and where is it that you want to be. Like I said in the beginning, you may have 10 years of experience, but you may still, when you're self-rating yourself or self-checking, you may still be at an L1 for subject application maybe, right? Or you could be a new teacher, but you're already a very proficient at creating content. So you could already be at an L2 there. So it's not dependent on what stage of your career you're at. Like, are you 5 years, 10 years, 15 years into teaching? It's more like, even in spite of whatever stage I'm at, be it a new teacher or an experienced one, where exactly do I fit at the moment and what can I do to get to the next level? Because that's the whole point of how we as teachers improve our competencies and then lead to student outcomes and building student competencies. So yeah, just like always, you can also get a lot of additional resources for different competencies, right? Technical, professional, core, for all of these different competencies on m.centa.org. You can find resources tagged to each of these competencies. And that may actually help you in your own professional development. And these are free as well, right? Own professional development towards those competencies to get to the next level. So we hope you're able to see m.centa.org. You can find the learning resources section, sign in, and then you should be able to read the resource, go through the resource. So that's it from our end. Thank you so much for joining this workshop. We hope all of you had useful takeaways and you are able to now define and structure teacher competencies in a better way. And of course, you have this checklist or framework, rubric, whatever you want to call it. It's the CENTA Teacher Competency Framework with you, which can help you at different points keep, like help you reflect where you stand for different firstly you have the list of structured list of competencies, and within that different aspects and where you stand with respect to each of these aspects. So on that note, Upasna and I will take your leave now. Thank you so much for being so participative, engaging, and we learned a lot about you as a crowd, about the teachers of BSSCA schools. It's been a great experience. We wish to have more such workshops with you, and we'll see you again next week for the last workshop in the series. Thank you so much. Goodbye. Have a nice evening.